Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me for what I'm hoping is the first of many e-lectures. Thank you, Kevin, so much for that introduction and for the invitation. I'm really excited. I get really excited about talking about goats and talking about animals in the past and today. So if I have a lot of enthusiasm, I apologize in advance. I also like to talk a lot with students, so I noticed some of you were already using the chat function, which is great. Thank you for doing that. I'm gonna ask you to do some chat functions, some polls, and some whiteboard stuff. So if you feel comfortable sharing that way, that's awesome. It helps me get a better sense of who you are, as well as kind of where you're coming from with your background. So I will keep this going. Let me just make sure. Remember this. Okay. Making sure you have this screen. So I always like to start my classes with memes. So I'm going to start with this one because I really like how this explains domestication, or a lot of people like to show wolves with pugs or wolves with chihuahuas, or just domesticated dogs that are so very different from the wild species. So this meme says, you know, a wolf, I'm going to go hang out with those humans. What could go wrong? And 30,000 years later, you end up with a pug in a dinosaur costume. So just so that I know kind of where everybody is coming from, I'm going to send you a poll. If this lets me let's do multiple choice. So it'll show up on your screen. And I just want to know if you think, is this an example of domestication? There's yes, there's no, and there's going to be unsure, just so that I can understand kind of what you're thinking. So it'll show up now. Feel free to answer. Do you think that this lovely, adorable pug in a dinosaur costume is an example of domestication? It's totally fine if you don't feel comfortable answering. It's also okay if you say no or you're unsure. By the end of this, we're going to have a better understanding. So I'll give a few more seconds. 10 more seconds for anybody else who wanted to, and then I'll shut it and I'll give you another example. So I'll shut it in 3, 2, 1. Oh, a few people going back and forth between yes and no. Okay, so I'm going to end it now. So 10 of you thought, or 9, somebody keeps going back and forth. 9 of you think yes, 4 of you think no, so I'll end it for this one. So this might be an example of domestication. I like this next example, if it goes through, because I grew up with cats and mine definitely taught me how to head bonk. We called it forehead loving. My question this time is not, is this an example of domestication of the cat, but is this an example of domestication specifically for the human? So it'll again be yes, no, and then unsure. So I'll start that. So we're looking at the human this time. Is the human been domesticated? Yeah, I'm seeing a little bit more unsure. That's totally fine. This is how we're starting off the lecture, to get you to think about it a little bit differently. I also love that they referred to it as head bonking, head butting, forehead love, lots of different things. Awesome. Okay, so 7 of you think yes, 2 of you think no, and 4 of you are unsure. I'm going to stop this one now. So a little bit more unsure about whether or not this is an example of domestication. Awesome. It might mean that we need a different understanding of domestication is. So let's switch to the plant world, because I'm not just going to talk about animals, but I want you to think about plants a little bit as well. So most of the leafy greens we have now, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, broccoli, all of them originated from this original species of wild mustard. So is our use of, say, kohlrabi or cabbage or broccoli, is this an example of domestication? And I promise this is the last one. I'm just gonna polling. Because we're not just thinking about, you know, wolf to puppy, we're thinking about humans and their cats, but we're also thinking about all of these species that we use now. This is an example of, we're also thinking about the plant species that we have access to now. So I'll start that one, and I promise this is the last one. So is this an example of domestication when we're looking at all of these leafy greens that we have access to now? Okay, so people are a little bit more sure about this one than they were about the cat and their owner. But this is to get us to think a little bit more about vegetation, and really to kind of, I will quit this now. Thank you all for participating in this, by the way. This is really, so 10 of you said yes, 2 of you said no. This is really to get us to think about domestication in a few different ways. And there's different concepts related to it that we will kind of jump back and forth between. If at any point anybody has a question as we're going through this or want to talk about a slide before I jump onto the other one, just feel free to raise your hand or use the chat function. I do have it open. So I know that Kevin gave me a bit of an introduction, but I want to give you a little bit more about who I am and why I am so interested in domestication. So I'm a licensed archaeologist. I'm currently in Ontario right now. I'm a licensed archaeologist working here. How do I do this? I look at human remains. I'm an osteologist. I work with animal remains, so I'm a zooarchaeologist, but I also do ethnographic work with living subjects and biochemical work. I know Kevin mentioned stable isotope analysis. I know one of your previous guest lecturers, Paula, she also does stable isotope analysis, and I'm specifically doing it to understand goats and sheep and their relationship now and in the past, which has led me to this whole concept of who domesticated who. So in those 3 polls I just gave you, we were looking at, did we domesticate wolves into dogs? Are our cats or our pets potentially domesticating us to be different? And are we changing what is available for us to be able to eat and to grow and to work with in our lives? So I'm looking now and in the past. So what we're going to go through today is we're going to kind of visualize what our world would look like without domestication. We're going to think about how domestication has also changed our world today to get us to a better understanding of what domestication is. We're going to look at the human-animal landscape relationships, as well as examine some of these applications. So I'm going to look at goats in Edmonton. I'm going to look at goats in Greece, just to give you kind of an application of what we're looking at. And by the end of today's lecture, we're going to have our discussion, because it's really going to be a discussion back and forth. We're going to be able to come up with a definition for domestication. I'm pretty sure your textbook has one. We're going to go through a few other options, see a few cases that may match what the definition looks at, some that may not match what the definition looks like. But we're also going to think about how this has changed our ancestors' lives and how it's continuing to change our lives now. You're also going to be able to discuss the examples that we go through and look at a few of those methods that you can use to study them. I'm just seeing a comment come up. So one of the comments is, I've heard that certain animals, including dogs and pigeons, domesticated themselves. Ooh, as their ancestors evolved to live around us, and once we noticed them, we started to use them for our own means. That's a really good point. And we'll be able to, as I'm going through a few of the definitions for domestication, we can revisit this, because I have another example similar to dogs and pigeons, specifically the fox. That we'll be able to kind of have that example, and when we go through the fox, we can talk about dogs and pigeons again if you want to see how does it match up, how does it kind of go with that that definition. So that's really good, and remind me if I forget about dogs and pigeons, but we can bring them up again. Really good point. So I know that everybody's kind of in a different place right now. So this is a map of Edmonton. I've labeled Northwest College, which is where your class technically would be right now. But chances are good most people are at home or at a place with really good internet or a place with better internet. And I know I'm nowhere near Alberta right now. want you to picture this area right now. So if you're in Edmonton, or what is known now as Edmonton, you're on Treaty 6 land, the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous peoples that could include the Cree, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Nakota Sioux, the Iroquois, the Dene, the Ojibwa, the Saulteaux, the Anishinaabe, the Inuit, and many others. They have a really important history, a really enriching history for this land, for this whole area. And today what we're going to do kind of as an exercise to get us started is to imagine this land, what is now known as Edmonton, tens of thousands of years ago, before the time of any First Peoples, before anybody happened to live on the land, before there was any first contact. And what we're going to do is you can write notes down on a piece of paper, jot a few notes to yourself on a computer. I want you to think about what this area, or the area that you are right now, what it would look like without any human contact, prior to any human contact. What type of vegetation was there? What type of animals? What type of waterways? How did they all interact? How did they live together? So while you're doing this, it will take about 3 minutes. So I want you to kind of do it for yourself. And then I'm going to open up a whiteboard. So it'll pop up on your screen. And if you feel comfortable, I want you to share some of the ideas of what you think this area would look like before human contact. And I may start moving things around just to clear up space. But think about it. And then if you feel comfortable, start writing on the whiteboard. I'm just gonna... I'm hoping that you'd be able to write on this. And so hopefully you'll be able to see the whiteboard now. If you have any ideas of what you think Edmonton would look like before human contact, feel free to write it in now. If you're having difficulty writing it in and you want to just write it into the chat, I can always jot it down for you as well. And it could be anything at all. If you think there were more trees, if you think there were more animals, if it looked different, if you think it looked the exact same. Yeah, you could use the pencil, you could do the text option, which is the T. Lots of forestry, yeah. Lots of fields, yeah. Whoever said lots of fields, it would be fields of different things, different, yeah. So Shauna, I'll quick add that in for you. No roads, no buildings, no factories, no homes, awesome. So more of a taiga look, yeah. So the different type of ecosystems, diversity of fauna, grasslands. Is really good, yeah. So more of a taiga look than a prairie. That's really good, yeah. So I'm actually going to. These are good. Thank you guys. Lots of animals around the river. Yeah. Do you think the river would look the same? Do you think it would still be nice and curved? Or do you think it would be wider? Deer, moose, and coyote. Yeah. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this. Because I want to. I'm just going to add this to our notes so that for later, if you want, you'd be able to refer to the map we just came up with. Because a lot of what you guys just said were things that I hadn't considered, but I think is actually really important. I really struggled with this, and that's one of the reasons why I gave it to you guys as well, was to see what you thought of, because I was really struggling. So I don't think there was anything else I did. I'm just adding it to our notes so I can stop this here. Go back to slideshow. Bear with me going back and forth. You guys are awesome. Share application screen. I am trying to unblock that option. Screen 2. Thank you guys so much. Okay. Allow. So here's the map that we just came up with, which is awesome. So this is what I thought of originally, was, and it's very similar to a lot of what you said. I do agree that I think there would be more taiga, more grasslands. I automatically thought of more trees. This is actually a photo from the Amazon, which a lot of the areas there haven't been touched by human contact. And I liked the fact that it actually still had the winding river, similar to what we have here in Edmonton. It was hard. I really struggled with this. Think about, I know somebody had written, there'd be deer, there'd be moose, there'd be coyote. Probably, right? I don't know about coyote, because coyote are a derivative of wolf, and a lot of those a lot of the changes from wolf into coyote actually happened because of human contact. But it's hard to imagine what type of fauna. I did figure, or I guessed, that there'd be different types of ecosystems coexisting, not coexisting within the area. But it's a really tricky thing to think about, how we go from this image here with all of the trees or the densely to what we have now in Edmonton. So to get from uncontacted to with human contact, you cut down a trees in an area, you have more people in an area, you're bringing in foreign animals, you're bringing in foreign plants. I know in my house right now, I have quite a number of foreign plant species, just because they're house plants now, but they're tropical. So we're changing a lot of our areas when humans move in. So, it changes the animals. You either get niche construction or your animals die off. And some animals do die off. Some of them adapt. Some of the humans will die off. Some of them will adapt. Your soil will change. The water will flow differently. So even though I thought that we could still have that nice winding river component to Edmonton, it may not have been that way. That may have been a result of humans damming a certain area, changes in climate, changes in just different aspects of where we live. And a lot of this, we did have a lot of gradual changes in the beginning. Obviously, when the colonizers came to this area, they did a lot of droughts all at once. Ah, you're calling me out on coyotes. I wasn't sure about that one. Sorry. So the question is, I've heard that, coyotes only lived on the prairies due to many large predators, including wolves, bears, and cougars. Um, Coyotes only got across North America when humans settled in North America. Okay. So you're teaching me more about coyotes than I knew about. More beavers, yeah, more dams and less fur trapping. So that would have changed how the waterways were. So if there were a lot more beavers in an area before, so many of them were excessively hunted, the area would have looked a lot different too with bison prior to bison being killed off. Obviously, they're starting to come back now, but it does change a lot of things. These are all really good. See, this is good. I like having this dialogue even though we're remote right now. So when people did come into this area, you adapt the landscape a little bit differently. You create your own niche. You work with the lands, you work with the animals, and the concept of niche construction, it's a lot of pressures placed on the environment or placed on the animals or placed on the humans, kind of by this human-animal landscape relationship. Landscape can mean various things, but for here, I want it to be about ecology and vegetation. And unfortunately, these are relationships that we can't easily see, which is why niche construction and domestication can be a concept people have a harder time wrapping their heads around because it's not necessarily something that we can look back in time to look at. But one thing that I do like to kind of consider with domestication, and I know we did it in the beginning with, say, wolves to dogs or big cats to little cats, we are able to look at some of the plant species over time. So, yeah, I gave it away. I've got a few different plants we're going to go through, and I want you to suggest what you think. So I'm going to show you a picture of the wild one, or the one that would have been prior to domestication, and I want you to see if you can think of what it looks like now or what it's actually referring to now. So as an example, this is a picture from the 17th century that actually shows watermelon. I'm only doing this one for you guys because I already gave it away. But this is what watermelon looks like now. So this is to show you that this is what the wild one looks like, or one that looks like prior to domestication, prior to us selectively favoring this beautiful, a lot more pulp in it. Not pulp, sorry, this is placenta. A lot more of that fleshy, really sweet component to it. There's less seeds. You don't have a lot of the white rind. So this is kind of us selectively changing a plant species over time. What about this one? Does anybody, and you can use the chat function, does anybody have an idea of what this plant is now? So this wild version, yeah, Andreas? Yeah, so Ronnie, a lot of you guys got this one, and I think this one is in your textbook. So it's teosinte is the wild version. Thank you guys so much for answering. And we have corn now. So corn was traditionally domesticated about 7,000 years ago. This older version, the teosinte, it's dry like if you were to bite into a raw potato. That's what it's compared to. And obviously now, sweet corn, we have and different types of corn varieties, we've domesticated or we've favored and selectively favored this version over it because it tastes better. It grows differently. It's 1,000 times larger. It's about 6.6 sugar versus 1.9% sugar in the other version. So this is just way tastier now. But a lot of the foods that we have now are because we've selectively bred for them or domesticated them. So one of the comments was, there's a plant with very few varieties today, and another example is bananas. You may see bananas on this list. So what about this one? Does anybody have any guesses what this plant is now? So it could be fruit, it could be vegetable. Oh, Katie thinks it's a tomato. Does anybody else have? I'm gonna wait for a few more guesses before I give what could be the correct answer. As a clue, on this left image, you can see some of these spikes on the part of the stem. Tomatoes or apples are really good guesses. I struggled with this one when I first saw the image. I was like, what is that? Orange, tomatoes, oranges, apples. You guys all have really good suggestions. Anybody else want to gander, I guess? Pineapples, the spikes got you on that one. Lemons, so this one, it was a pear. Oh, lots of good guesses. So one of the earliest ones of these was cultivated in China, and it is the eggplant. So the spikes that you can see on the stem, on the image on the left, we don't really have those anymore. We do get some still on the green. Yeah, it's right. It's an eggplant. So we've selectively bred it to get rid of the spines, to be quite a bit larger, to obviously change in color. And the flesh is quite a bit different. The flavor is quite a bit different. And yeah, we have the ones we have now, which is really cool. So this is one of the big changes in domestication. What about, oh, it doesn't freeze, this one. Fruit or vegetable, any guesses? Roddy thinks carrot. And, oh, radish. Yeah, radish is a good idea. Carrot's a good idea. Horseradish. A potato. Oh, I can see potato. So it is a root vegetable. Yeah, so the earliest known version of these is grown in 10th century Persia or Asia Minor. Originally, they were going to be purple, but we now have them as orange. So Rodney had it right, carrot. So obviously they're a lot bigger than they are now. They have quite a much stronger flavor now, and it's actually become a regular winter crop. So it's something that we can grow in the winter, and they've changed quite a bit. Good question. You guys are really good at guessing. Hopefully it switches. What about this one? Any guesses? Yeah, banana. Rodney already had this one before I even mentioned it, which was good. Yeah, both of you got it right. So we have two wild species of banana on the left that have these massive seeds. And if you breed them together, you are able to get them into the version we have now. So the comment about orange carrots to represent William of Orange in the Netherlands, I've recently heard that. It was either on a news or on a podcast I was listening to. So that's really interesting. That's one of the reasons that we have it now specifically to be orange. With the bananas, so they were cultivated about 7,000 years ago in what is now known as Papua New Guinea. And yeah, obviously they're quite a bit tastier now. They don't have these massive seeds in them. We're able to peel them a lot easier. So there's a lot of reasons why we've selectively bred them. Then is the last example to have you guessing. If it switches, there we go. This is the one that stumped me the most. So any guesses on fruit or vegetable, which one this is? Which type this is, sorry, which fruit or vegetable this one is. See, pomegranate is what I thought of too, because it had the bottom part here that totally looks like a pomegranate, but it's not a pomegranate. Oh, lemon's a good guess. The version we have today, this exterior here is nice and soft and a little bit fuzzy. Peach, yes, the fuzzy gave it away, didn't it? So the version we have now, so the version on the left, the wild version, it's actually about the size of a cherry, but it tasted like a lentil. So no sugar in it at all. The ones we have on the right, they're 64 times larger, 27% juicier, and 4% sweeter, and way more appealing to me. So I think you guys are awesome. Those were really good guesses. But it's really interesting for us to see, and I'm going to bring it back to this slide. I know this was the first question I asked you, but it's really interesting for us to be able to see how we go from that original species to what we have now. And this is really nice examples for us to be able to see, you know, pre-domesticated to domesticated, or wild to cultivated. And these are a lot of the words that people try to use to explain the human-plant relationship. So what does domestication mean when we're talking about plants? Is it just wild plant procurement? Is it wild plant food production? Is it cultivation? Is it agriculture? This is the human-plant relationships from your textbook specifically. And these are the 4 different types of processes that eventually lead from the wild to the domestic variant of plants. But I look at this list and it's entirely based off of plants used as food. Why else would we use plants? Again, you can use the chat function if you want. What are other reasons why we would use plants? Today, in the past, medicine. Awesome, you got my first one. Sweet. Thank you, Shauna. We have aloe vera helping with burns. Peppermint is for digestion. Marigold and lavender are antiseptic, anti-inflammatory. Lemon is for calming. Rosemary helps with circulation. Oh, awesome. Rodney said clothing. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why we could use plants. So food, medicine, clothing. Any others before I reveal? You guys got some of the really big ones, which is awesome. We could use it for shelter. Yeah, banana leaves for sea. You said it just as I was clicking it. You knew what you were doing. That's awesome. For shelter, for fuel. So a lot of the fuel that we could use comes from different types of plants. Fiber, so traction. You could use it for warmth. You could use it for animal fodder. Ornamental use, yes. You got to the last one a lot of people don't understand or don't necessarily think of. And like I said, I have lots of plants in my house right now. I know Kevin does as well. They're ornamental, so plants can bring us joy. They could be used. There's actually farmers around the world. I know of some on the East Coast who they are Christmas tree farmers. So they are actually, growing these plants for ornamental use. Rodney, you're correct as well. You can use it for biological warfare. I prefer the ones on this list, but you're absolutely right. It has been used in different ways. The different uses for everything in the world, right? The one here that I really specifically like is the animal fodder. And like I said, I specifically look at sheep and goats and a lot of the animals, but as we started raising animals and as we started using animals for a lot of different aspects of our lives, we also needed to be concerned about, well, what are they going to eat? So we had to start growing food for them or collecting food for them or cultivating food for them. Animal fodder today, a lot of the corn that you see being grown around Alberta isn't for human consumption. It's actually used as animal fodder or animal food. Which leads us to animal domestication. So this is the human-animal relationship. I didn't do the wild versus modern kind of game with you guys before because we can see them a lot now. We have the wolf to the domestic dog. We have tigers to domestic cats, or different versions of wild felines into their more domestic versions. And what I'm interested in is kind of what type of human-animal relationships do you have in your own lives? So I'll open up the whiteboard again, and I'm interested in knowing, what animals you've lived with. Is it wild or is it domestic? And what purpose does it serve? So I'll quick pull up a blank whiteboard, and again, feel free, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But I'm going to do you live with non-human animals? Because technically people are animals too, right? And I'll keep it black. Is it wild or is it domestic? And then is it a working animal or a companion or a working animal? So that could be a farm animal or support animal. Is it a companion? is it also ornamental? So feel free to write in your examples under wild and domestic, and also feel free to write them in under working, companion, or ornamental, just for us to get a sense of the different animals people are living with. So feel free to write those in either on the chat function, yeah, dogs, or some of you are already writing on the whiteboard. This is awesome. I can add mine in too. You cannot see green. Fish, yeah. So if I move yours, it's just to give us a little bit more space. Oh, okay, Shauna, I'm gonna put your, so you want your duckling to be under wild, maybe? And then maybe under companion? That one I'm not sure about. Ooh, domestic cattle. Whoever wrote cattle, do you want to put it under ornamental, companion, or working as well? Yeah. What's this? These are awesome. Somebody had a pet magpie. That is exciting. Whoever said magpie, can you also write it under working, companion, or ornamental? Or if you think it belongs in a different category, feel free to write a different category. Because I'm very curious about technically the magpie or the duckling. I'm curious as to whether or not, like, what type of, for what purpose you feel that that animal or that type of relationship is. Do you think it's working? Yeah. Do you think it's companion, ornamental, or I'm not even sure. It could be under a totally different heading that I haven't put here. Oh, snake under domestic. Whoever put snake, do you feel that it was a working snake, a companion snake, or an ornamental snake? I guess technically I could also put science as a heading. Because I know that I've had some animals as well for scientific purposes. I have a colleague who works with rats, and I know that hers technically, they would be working though, but they might be science. Oh, put them under companion? Okay. Got you. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to take magpies live in my garage. To find around. Okay. Awesome. Okay. The magpie lives in your garage and he brings you things he finds around the neighborhood. You consider him ornamental. Technically, if he's bringing you things too, he could also be working. This is awesome. I am going to take a screenshot of this so we can add it to our lecture. This is awesome. This is making me so excited because these are all things that we can talk about. He brought you a cat skull. That's an awesome working magpie. I have to go and collect mine. Magpie to do that for me. I should put the caveat that I have random animal skulls just as comparative, not that I necessarily collect them, but I do for teaching purposes. Just adding this to our lecture, and then I'll bring this back to the screen. I don't think anybody else has added anything. Slideshow. You guys are being so into this. I am loving this. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna shut this. I think I got everybody's. I think. Oh, beard. Yeah, I did get the bearded dragon and the turtles. Awesome. Okay, let's go back to my screen. So you should be able to see almost now? Now. Okay, so this was our whiteboard session. So these are awesome. I love hearing about everybody's different experiences with the animals that they have relationships with. So a lot of the domestics we would think of, dogs, cattle, chicken. This is the first time I've ever done this where nobody has had a cat. And then wild, magpie, fish, duckling, horses, bearded dragon, turtles. I think of a lot of species like snakes and fish and birds as being more wild. But I know that they have been bred in captivity. So at what point do they go from this wild column to that domestic column? The columns below where we put whether it's work, it's companion, whether it's ornamental, these are some of the reasons why we do, have these animals in captivity, why we do take them from their wild version to their domestic version. And, for different people, these are all going to be wild. For some people, they're going to be domestic. So this is really to get us to think about why we have these relationships with different animals, and for what purpose. These are awesome. So we can revisit these. But domestication, so this is from your textbook, and Bocconi, he's done a lot of work with animals. So the definition that they have for animal domestication is the capture and taming by human beings of animals of species with particular behavioral characteristics. So be, the animals that we want for working purposes or companion purposes or ornamental purposes. Okay. Their removal from their natural living area and breeding community. So they're no longer necessarily in the wild, although I think Asia, it's you who had the magpie. Yours, I'd say, is still in your neighborhood, still in its natural living and breeding community. So you're right, it would still totally be a wild animal based off of this definition. And their maintenance under controlled breeding conditions for mutual benefits. So chances are good, most of the people, and myself included, any of the animals on this list, we are not actually breeding them in our homes. Whoever said horses and cattle, you may be breeding them in your homes if you're living on a farm that does focus on breeding. Or any of you, if you happen to have a tank of fish or you happen to be a dog breeder or any of these animal breeders, you could be somebody who is maintaining the control of the breeding conditions for mutual benefits. Okay. But there really isn't, I think, a one-fits-all definition for domestication. And that, I'm going to go back to our whiteboard. Whoever put horses in the wild component, that's awesome. That's what you still see them as a wild horse. I think, my understanding of domestication, I think of wild horses being a very specific breed way back in different parts of Eurasia, and the horses that we have now being the domestic version. But it's different definitions. So considerations for is it domestic, is it not domestic, is are you living or cohabitating in the same environment as them? Are you breeding them in captivity, which is usually human-driven, or are you getting your animal as a result of breeding in captivity? Is there sustained multi-generational relationships? So whoever had the duckling or the magpie, you were caring for it. Yes, you were living or cohabitating in the same environment of it, but you don't necessarily have the breeding and multi-generational relationships. You wouldn't necessarily have the genetic changes yet that you're going to see. So these are some of the changes that domestication causes. So these may help you to have a better definition of what domestication is. But again, it's different things for different people. So coming to terms with how you differentiate one animal as being domestic and one animal as being wild could relate to these factors. But I'm an archaeologist. How do I look at domestication in the past? I obviously can't see these multi-generational changes. I can't see breeding in captivity. I can't see the animals necessarily in the homes of somebody. So how do I look at it? So some clues that an animal has been domesticated is an animal or the species is found outside of its natural range. So I'm going to go back to this picture just to show you. These are actual bones that I analyzed in Greece. Most of them are domestic species. There are some wild animals in there as well, but this is just a few of the bones that were found in one deposit. So in that grouping of bones, if I was to happen to find a cat or remains of a cat species, that's going to be an animal or species found outside of its natural range. What I'm looking at in ancient Greece was long before cats made it onto that land. They were already being domesticated elsewhere, but they weren't yet in Greece. So if I happen to find a cat, remains of a cat in that area, it would be a clue of domestication. Animal remains that have been changed or morphological changes. So at our site, we have boar remains, which are massive. Boars are huge creatures, especially compared to pigs, domestic pigs. So when you start to see those morphological changes between the wild, which would be the boar, and the domestic, which would be the pig, you're able to see, okay, domestication has occurred in this area, and you have that species differentiation. If you see a sudden increase in the number of remains at one site, so at our site, we have a lot of sheep and goats. About 70% of the remains I'm looking at are sheep and goat. If you have a sudden increase of an animal at that site, chances are good it's domestication. Some examples where that doesn't happen is at kill sites. So if you look at, say, head smashed in buffalo jump in Alberta, you have an abundance of bison at certain kill sites. It doesn't mean that those bison were domesticated. It's a specific kill site, and those animals, it was part of the hunt. It was part of that tradition. So you're going to get really only bison at that site. This is, say, an assemblage where you have a community living at an area, or you have a midden, so it's a garbage, of people staying at a site for extended periods of time, and you're looking at all the animals that are there. If you have one species predominantly, chances are good they've been domesticated, they're being held for certain things. The fourth one is an increase in specific animals, whether it's an age or a sex thing. So if I have, again, I'm going to look at sheep and goats. If I have a ton of younger or fetal or, say, 1-year-old goat remains, chances are good that they are eating them for a specific reason. And before 1 year, they're raising them for their fat. If I have a whole bunch of older individuals, they're keeping them for their fur or their wool, or they're milking them. Sorry, I'm just looking at a comment. So when it comes to morphology, a pig has a skull developed for feeding on animal feed instead of a skull for foraging like a boar. Yes. So you are going to see that morphological change. So boars have massive tusks. Some of it is for protection, but their teeth are morphologically different. The reason their skulls are so different, like you said, Rodney, is that you don't have to worry as much about, so the larger ones, they have to chew a lot. They have to use their teeth differently. They've got different muscles for their heads versus the domestic ones, which, they're eating scraps, they're eating food, it's a lot softer. It's one of the reasons why our jaws and our teeth are changing over time, is because our food is getting softer. If you look at our evolutionary relatives, their teeth are a lot bigger. They have considerable muscle attachment sites that are different as well. So these are awesome. That's awesome. These are all different things that we can look at as clues for domestication or for changes over time. I'm going to show you an example, and I know I said it before, where you'd spoken about dogs and pigeons. So this one is my example, and it's going to autoplay a video of a fox, and we're going to use this fox as an example of modern domestication. So I know we've talked a lot about, thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, but we're going to look at this as an example. So I'm hoping that the volume comes through. If not, comment and I'll pause it and try and make it louder. No audio. Okay. So let me see if I can do it this way. Thank you for letting me know.
Giant ears, so adorable.
Can you hear it now? Okay, so I'm getting a comment that you can't really hear it, so I'll actually take you through it without playing the volume on it. So keep watching, and I'll try and jump around to what she's saying. So she's just talking about how adorable these foxes are, and you have there was a few experiments in Russia within the last 20 to 30 years, where they were actually trying to find a species of fox, or they were trying to create a species of fox. Yeah, so it's not the first time it's been domesticated, but this was one of the ones that was the most, they were actually able to really get it to a species that, you know, it was just like having a baby dog or a puppy or a kitten. It was playful. It's a gray variant here. And instead of having the prey drive that you get with a lot of wild species, you even still get it with some domestic dogs. The animal was really docile. It was cuddly. It was a lot of the things that we see now with the domestic dog species. So if you are interested in it later, the YouTube link is there. But it really just show an example of how in the last 20 to 30 years even they have been able to domesticate domesticate a wild species. And I was going to bring it back to the examples that we've gone through. You know, is it actually truly domesticated? And it did match all of those examples that we spoke about. They were living or cohabitating in the same environment. They were bred in captivity, and they were able to breed them over the course of 20 to 30 years, that they actually had sustained multi-generational relationships, and they did end up getting genetic changes. They had these, they had red versions, but they also had these gray versions that looked a lot more docile. So it is just an example, a modern example, that we're able to see what did the wild version look like, what does the other version look like now, the more domestic version. And I'm just going to, it is true that the red fox was semi-domesticated recently. There was a fox in South America called the Culpeo, which became extinct, which became the extinct Fujian dog. Yep, so there's a lot of different animals that they have tried to domesticate them. Zebras is one that they actually were not successful with. So they have tried to domesticate zebras, and for whatever reason, they were actually not able to. They could tame some, but the ones that they were able to tame, they weren't able to breed them in captivity to get that multi-generational tamed effect in the species, or to get any genetic changes. So there are success stories, like with the domestic foxes in Russia, but there's also the ones where it doesn't quite work. So as before, we were speaking about how you can use plants in different ways, whether it's for food, whether it's for clothing, or for medicine. You also have a lot of these different relationships with with animals, and you have different processes that you're able to have these relationships. So how did we go from having the wild version to a more tamed version to a more domestic version? And this is what your book explains, is that it started with, you know, random hunting. There's no control over the herd itself. You're just randomly hunting. And then you have some controlled hunting where there's selective hunting of the herds. And then you have herd following, where you're following specific herds. So you're getting closer and closer, or more and more entwined in these wild animals' lives, so that you're eventually able to end up with, closed herding. You're changing the genetic makeup of them, you're factory farming them. So there's a lot of different kind of gradual changes to these relationships over time, which I was trying to think, what are other reasons we would keep animals, just like with the plants, not just food. Why else would we domesticate animals? So some of you gave examples, you've got a companion animal, you've got a working animal, you've got an ornamental animal. And there's a few other reasons that I found we could keep animals. It would be for their meat, whether you're wanting to eat them. It could be for their milk, their hide, their fur, their hair, or their wool, their manure. If you wanted to use it as a fertilizer, you could use it for power or for traction. You could use it for land management, and you can use it for companionship. So the two groups that I have highlighted here, so milk, hide, fur, hair, and wool, as well as land management, are two examples that I'm going to go into today. Yeah, so Ronnie's giving an example that you can have certain dogs and chickens bred to fight. So that's another thing that people were using, not just for companionship, but those ones, and I don't have it up here, you could have animals for working. So I think the ones that were bred to fight, in many ways it was considered working. Just like a lot of the time now, we've got support animals, and those animals are bred and trained to be working animals. So the first example that I'm going to jump into is with the milk, hide, fur, hair, and wool. So I work in Greece. I know I said in the beginning, and although I'm an archaeologist and I work on an archaeological site, I also work in a community. So I work with shepherds near the city of Pharsala, and there we go. So it's near the city of Pharsala here. So this is Greece. The site that I actually work in is in Narthaki. And Yorgos is the shepherd here on the right, with his modest-sized flock. So he has about 30 animals in this group, and him and his grandson, they would care for the flock just in the community. So there's about 150 people in our community, 10 animals to every human. And his relationship with his animals, he does raise them for milk. So he does it for milk and for wool. And during the Easter season, some of the lambs that they raise are used for meat. Part is Easter. So he has a very different human-animal relationship, even a relationship with the lands. Because he only has 30 animals in his grouping, he doesn't really have to worry about finding lots of area for the animals to eat. He can stay local with them. He can only get a little bit of milk from his group, not enough to say have, a very large production of it, but he has enough that he is able to keep this as a hobby farm or a hobby herd. And his is very different than, say, there's a group of brothers that work with 300 sheep and goats up in the highlands. So this is still the same community. They have a number of dogs that help them as well. Again, that's a very different human-animal relationship, because these dogs are working, helping to keep the herd in line. But they are able to raise and keep 300 animals. That's a lot of mouths to feed. So they actually have to go into the highlands every day with this massive herd so they can find different areas for them to graze. And it's not just the humans, using the animals for their wool or for their milk. The animals in turn trust the humans. So they have to rely on the dogs. They have to rely on the humans to keep them safe, to kind of make sure they come back home each night so that they can be protected from other predators, that they've got enough area to eat. They're eating things that are good for them. They're getting enough nutrients, all of these things. And the herders here have different vocal commands or whistles that they're able to maintain the animals. So the breeds of dogs that they're using, some of them are bigger dogs, some of them are smaller dogs, but a lot of the animals they grow up with the herd. So the animals, like the dogs that they have here, won't go after the sheep or goats, but they will go after somebody walking anywhere near their herd. I found that out if I got too close to their herd taking pictures. I had a few dogs come up to say hello very aggressively, but they wouldn't do any of that with their sheep or goats. And so this is a different relationship that this herder has to have with the group of animals and the land. They have to know the land really well. And it's interesting, this third example, which I had no idea before I went to Greece that I would see this type of relationship between the animals and the shepherd. Does anybody have any idea where the shepherd is in this picture? You can see the animals. Anybody any ideas where the shepherd is? Yeah, shepherd's in here. So, and this wasn't the only time that this happened. This track is actually using car horn, whistles, and voice commands. Heard this, and he's actually driving the herd, which I thought was fantastic. I had never seen this before. I never heard of it happening before. But it's a modern way of kind of adapting to shepherding. And it's a different relationship, and it's not just that the animals in this grouping have become accustomed to the shepherd. They've actually become accustomed to the car, to the horn. They can move great distances if they've got a larger herd. A lot of the shepherds were older, and they didn't necessarily have physical capacity to go up into the hills every day, to move great distances. So it was a really interesting adaptation and a very different relationship that they were able to have with these animals. So when you're managing animals for milk or wool, you need a larger herd. If you're going to do it for your subsistence or your livelihood, you do have to have larger animals, which means that you have to take them to different areas to get enough food. You have to be careful that you don't modify your landscape too much. You can't have them graze down a crop so much that you lose your crop, or that you can't go back to that area in a few months when it's grown back. So you really have to kind of play at that relationship with your animals to keep them happy, the land to keep them happy, and you've changed because you're taking care of these animals on the landscape. The second example, and this is where my ethnography comes in, is working in Edmonton. So I worked with Goatworks, and Goatworks is an awesome initiative that the city of Edmonton started in 2017. So it obviously took a break this year, but we're hoping that it comes back. And this is the example with using animals, not for their milk, not for their meat, not for their wool, but using goats for their ability to manage land. So Rundle Park, you can see it highlighted here on the right. It is this old dump here. There is a video I'll have linked. We won't be able to watch it on the next slide, but you will be able to check it out later if you're interested. And it's an old dump site, and it's very hilly. And you end up having invasive species, noxious weed species, like the yellow in here you can see is leafy spurge. And normally we would, to prevent these noxious weeds or these invasive species from choking out the good species, we would use a form of pesticide or herbicide. And with the 2015 ban in Edmonton, that's not an option in this park anymore. It's too close to the waterway. It would hurt the water. It would hurt the animals that are naturally living there. So instead, the city brought in goats, and they were able to, I guess I can have the video play, just so you can see some of the scenes, but you won't be able to hear it. The CBC National did a video of it, so you'll be able to see some of the animals in the park. But you have birds, so it's Jeanette Hall and Dan Vandenberg, and they are 450 animals to come in, and they come 3 times per summer, and they were able to have their goats in different areas of the park, and they were able to have them, they're trained, so not only are they educated, but they are species, and that goes through multi-generations, and you're able to have these animals, I'll jump, so they come into the park, and they will selectively go after these noxious species. For them, that's the taste that they prefer. It doesn't hurt their system, and then they don't harm any of the natural flora. So they're able to drop their poop, helps as a natural fertilizer, and it goes away very quickly if you've ever seen goat poop. And they were able to go from this image in 2017 to this image in 2019, where you have tons of noxious weed species, and then you have this natural landscape kind of coming back because they were able to eat the different species. So, relationship between the shepherds and their animals, and again, they also have dogs, and the dog breeds that they had grew up as puppies with the kids, the goats, so they actually grew up with the herds, and it's, you know, your relationship between these humans and animals and landscapes, you're training them to do different things, you're preventing overgrazing, you're manuring the site, and you're getting them to return it to this more natural landscape. So in the beginning, we kind of did that thought experiment of, you know, what did Edmonton look like prior to humans arriving here? Obviously, this is a filled in dump, so this isn't showing us what it was like before humans came. But it's interesting how we can use animals to help us get back to a more natural, or, you know, a more, I guess, pre-contact type of landscape. And without the humans kind of, you know, having that relationship with the animals and then having that relationship with the landscape, sustainably, we're able to kind of continue to move forward with it. So this was a really cool project. If you ever get a chance to go and see them at Rundle Park, it's really interesting. But for me, it was a different way of looking at that human-animal landscape relationship. So that's the second example. And kind of just a summary of what we were doing, we've just gone through different types of animal domestication, or just different types of domestication, and you'd be able to kind of describe that process and how you can understand it. You know, is it just genetic? Is it just about taming? Is it about having that relationship with the magpie that lives in your garage? So there's different reasons why humans domesticated animals. We talked about a few of them. We talked about how humans are impacting animals, how animals are impacting the landscape, and how, you know, I know a lot of these questions relate to animal domestication, but in the beginning we also talked about plant domestication and kind of that relationship we have with plants. But that is all that I came to talk about. You guys have been really great about kind of using the chat function and joining in with our conversation. And I loved the mental maps and the whiteboards that we're able to come up with. That was awesome. You all participated so much. Thank you so much. And I am here for any of your questions. I know you've been asking things as we went, so I'm here for any of that.